we have had the pleasure to get a hands-on first look at Ascendant Studios' debut game, Immortals of Aveum, which is set to release on July the 20th. EA was kind enough to invite our team out to their headquarters in order to get a look behind the curtain at this first-person magic shooter and to put together a video about our experience. Now, before we go any further, we just want to first thank EA for sponsoring this video and offering the opportunity to experience Immortals Aveum early. And while yes, the video is sponsored by EA, I do want to say we already had intentions of reviewing Immortals since the first time we saw its trailer. And we also fully plan on reviewing the entire game once it releases, as we firmly believe that a game has to stand on its own and earn its own merits. But now that that's out of the way, I do want to jump into today's video and tell you about our experience. First up, Immortals of Aveum is the first game to be released by Ascendant Studios and actually formed in 2018 by ex-Dead Space and Call of Duty developers. Now, according to Brett Robbins, the founder and CEO of Ascendant, the studio was built with the lofty vision to create a visceral, single-player, first-person shooter unlike anything the world has ever seen in decades. Drawing upon inspirations from IPs like Lord of the Rings and Marvel's Cinematic Universe, you're dropped into the middle of a massive, millennia-spanning war known as the Everwar. Now, only two kingdoms remain: the Kingdom of Lucium, to whom Jack, the protagonist, belongs, and the Theocracy of Rasharn, led by a powerful Magnus known as Sandrak, who has pushed the Kingdom of Lucium to the brink of annihilation. Now, Jack is what they refer to in-game as the Unforeseen, which basically means that he's a late bloomer. He didn't start manifesting his magical talents until later in life, and when he did, he demonstrated the rare ability to control all three types of magic in the world, that being Force, that blue magic, Chaos being that red magic, and Life being that green magic. Now, he's recruited by the commander of Lucium's forces, a character portrayed by the illustrious Gina Torres, and trained to become a Magnus, or a magic-wielding soldier, with the goal of becoming an immortal, which were lovingly described by the devs as essentially like the Navy SEALs of the Lucium's army. Now, Jack is also known as a Triarch, a Magnus capable of wielding and mastering all three sources of this magical power. You can actually see like Jack's mastery of this magic best exemplified by the game's massive skill tree progression system, which we're going to be touching on here in just a bit. So narratively, you, the protagonist, at the end of the day, you, as Jack, are all that stands between Sandrak and the end of the world. Sound dire? Now, Immortals of Aveum will be releasing on the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X and S, and on PC. Now, when we demoed the game, we were provided a pretty beefy rig with our choice of either controller or mouse and keyboard. The controls felt pretty natural for the both, and we actually opted for the controller for our time in game. The PC we used to demo the game featured a RYZEN R9 7900X. Needless to say, guys, we cooking out here, which takes us to the performance of the game itself. Immortals seem to be holding up pretty well, and you're seeing all like these particle effects on screen at any given moment. We played on high graphics, 4K resolution, max ultra on everything. Now, it wasn't all perfect. During the demo, we did see some drops in frames that tended to occur, oddly enough, outside of combat, which is like the opposite of what we expected. Matter of fact, in those crazy firefights, where there's tons of explosions and particle effects jumping all over the place, we didn't have a single dip in frame rate. Now, the worst performance that we actually experienced is in the forest area later in the demo, something I hope the devs do address before the release of this game. Could have been the sheer amount of foliage around us, but it was in that area that we saw the biggest drop off in our frames. With that being said, though, we were told that this was a dev build and not the fully final polished product. But honestly, sitting where it is now, other than the hiccup there in the forest area, everything was very crisp. Honestly, performance was great. Granted though, this is on a beefed up PC. I'm curious to see how it plays on consoles, but notice there was no mention of old gen consoles, just the most recent ones: Xbox S and X, the PlayStation 5. Immortals here is leaning into that new generation. Now to the point that I think a lot of you are probably asking, Cross, what kind of game is Immortals of Aveum? Well, it's actually a first-person magic shooter, something we don't see a lot of, right? Now, from Ascendant Studios, they stated that their goal was to combine the high-octane gameplay we've come to expect from games like Call of Duty and even Destiny with the fantasy elements of magic, beasts, and a world on the precipice of disaster. Now, we're not talking like cute little spells like turning things into frogs or making things levitate. We're talking nasty, visceral, hard-hitting magical effects that leaves your enemies devastated on the battlefield. And you, as a Magnus, this magic-wielding soldier, you use a sigil to focus your magic into these brutal attacks. This is not the Hogwarts experience. This is war! Now, there are many different sigils for each of the three magic types that do change the way your spells work. Like whether your red chaos magic blast acts like a one-shot overpowered magic shotgun or a cannon with an AoE effect, but has slow travel time. These are just two examples from a multitude of options at your disposal. You can find sigils actually out on the road from chests and defeating enemies, or even crafting them. That's right, guys, there's crafting in this game. We spent some time going through and breaking down various sigils and attribute boosting items like rings, bracers, and totems, and we essentially just focus on building and upgrading our arsenal to better suit our playstyle. For example, these slightly harder hitting green global projectiles were fun, and AoE blast red magic was cool, but it just didn't match what we were trying to do. We wanted something for up close and personal with chaos magic. We wanted that blast to be devastating. And if we were going to have a rapid fire option, we wanted to be truly rapid fire with a ridiculous magazine size and fire rates. So we actually built the sigils that would let us do just that, and then took the remaining gold and magic essence and upgraded all of our gear until everything was maxed out. Again, we can't emphasize enough just how fun it was to lash at an enemy from a distance, pull them face first into a mouthful of red vengeance. Now to us, games are meant to be played the way as gamers want to play them. We hate being shoehorned into a stealth mission or using a specific item or weapon ability over everything else. We love the freedom to play how we want. The moment Immortals of Aveum finished telling us how to game and handing us the reins, which thankfully happens pretty early on in the campaign, that was the moment that the game really opened up for us. Now, it being a single player story-based game, there's some railroading that has to occur. The devs have to put the player on the right track to continue that story while maintaining that level of freedom. Immortals of Aveum does pretty well here, guys. It provides you with an objective and the tools you might need to complete whatever task you're trying to go after, but it doesn't stop you from exploring the open world. We saw no indication of that. There's definitely some hidden treasures and areas to explore along the way, and oftentimes these treasures manifest themselves in gold, sigils, or even spells and upgrades that you can use to better kit yourself out. Now, let's talk bosses. Bosses have mechanics that you do need to be wary of, some of which are more obvious than others, and it's in figuring out how to telegraph a fight or turn that weakness against your opponent that was the highlight of that experience. We can tell you right now that we had the same amount of fun fighting the first boss that we had fighting the big, terrifying, dangerous dragon, and we pretty much just banged our head against a wall until we beat that first boss. Still, there's a certain joy that comes with knowing that there was probably an easier way to beat that encounter, which actually makes us want to tackle this thing all over again with a different magic build. Now I want to circle back around to that skill tree that we previously mentioned, along with the type of sigils that you can use. Your skill tree is broken into 3 sections, one for each type of magic, with over 80 different talents to actually choose from. And within each of these sections, you have your basic skill upgrades, but also have the ability to apply your ascension points, aka skill points, to upgrade more than 25 different spells and then empower them even further. Now, in order to pick the most powerful upgrades though, you'll need to invest into the lower tiers. This means that you'll have to decide on whether you want to be a jack of all trades, or you can focus on a specific ability and attack. For example, there are a whole slew of abilities that use mana crystals to do things like send out green seeking projectiles, or a blue wave of energy that shatters shields and causes massive knockback damage. Now, every single one of those abilities, whether it's a strike ability, your standard attack, a control ability like the limpets or lash, your furies, the special abilities like shatter that use mana crystals, and of course your dominions, which are your ultimate attacks that build up over time and deal devastating amounts of damage. During the demo, we were providing the Immolate Ultimate, which combines all 3 types of magic into this like devastating beam that sheds through groups of enemies and bosses alike. Thankfully, if you're not entirely happy with your choices for the skill tree that you choose or that you spec into, there is a respec system built right into the Ascendant tree, so you don't have to go to any vendors or merchants or temples or whatever just to correct an error. Now, you'll be able to respec at a moment's notice with the abundant amount of gold you'll be collecting from defeated enemies. It's going to be really exciting to see how many different builds and playstyles that people come up with post-release. There's a lot to work with. Now, all in all, guys, how was our experience playing Immortals? Pretty positive, guys. The combat was fun, if a little repetitive at times, and the world really seems to be steeped in a rich, deep lore that I'm looking forward to tapping into. As mentioned before, there were some performance issues in areas that seemed like it shouldn't have had issues, but it was balanced out by the excellent performance during the combat encounters themselves. Immortals of Aveum was built in Unreal Engine 5.1, and it is truly a beautiful game, and it often flaunts it any chance it gets with detailed and vibrant environments. Unfortunately, the trade-off here is that downtick in performance, something we hope to see get tuned up before release. And another thing that came to mind while working our way through the cabans we were presented presented with was a distinct lack of variety that led to some of the repetitive combat encounters. While for the most part, the combat was intense and fun and had us running around constantly, we were also seeing the same combination of soldier, healer, mage, and brute in almost every scenario. In fact, one of the most interesting fights we had was near the end of the demo when a new enemy was randomly introduced into the fray. This gorilla-like beast with these red glowing markings, along with this mini-boss who likes to teleport around, made things very interesting. We're hoping that the variety of enemies we saw during the demo was just limited to the small section of the game that we actually were allowed to dip our toes in, which is most likely the case. I am begging that we get more beasts like these. This is what adds so much flavor to the combat here. It keeps everything fresh, it keeps the engagements fresh, and it always keeps us second guessing how to approach every encounter. And the one thing we kept coming back to, even when talking to some of our fellow content creators after the demo, was the replayability of the game. Will the game have a new game plus feature? Does beating the game on the hardest difficulty unlock an even harder difficulty, like the original Dead Space did? Are there extra rewards or alternate endings for going back and beating the game all over? These are some of the things we were left pondering, and we don't have the answer still. I certainly hope the answer is yes. If not to all of them, at least some of them. It's entirely possible that the answer to replayability and its predicaments lies within how the player chooses to play the game. And if you look back at some of the most pivotal single-player titles out there, it's that as long as the core gameplay is fun, the players will always find a way to keep playing. I'm certainly looking forward to all these green and blue magic speedruns and the insane builds people come up with. Guys, you can pre-order Immortals of Aveum, releasing July the 20th, 2023 on the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X and S, as well as on PC via either the app for EA, Steam, and the Epic Game Store. These are our thoughts. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this first-person magic shooter, Immortals of Aveum. We will be streaming this game live when it does launch, so feel free to come by our Twitch as well, guys. We would love to have you join us. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.